If we keep the walls up, this country will.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome. My name is Noelle Figueroa, and welcome to episode 4 in season 2 of the P.W.P sessions. That's the Poets for Purpose sessions. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. We are in for another awesome episode. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of interviewing Miss Lynne Shapiro. And before we get started, I'm just going to do a brief introduction and share her bio. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. So as mentioned, this is episode 4 in season 2. And for those not familiar with the PWP sessions, the PWP sessions podcast is a podcast that I created where I conduct interviews with poets, authors of poetry, and I've just recently started to interview rappers or MCs. And I feature a performance of their work along with a Q&A session at the end of the interview. I am the host, Noelle Figueroa. I am a poet, author, blogger, workshop facilitator, and event host, and I am the creator of the PWP sessions. And tonight's guest is Miss Lynne Shapiro. Lynne Shapiro is a poet who lives in Hoboken, New Jersey with her husband and turtle. She has 2 recently published chapbooks, To Set Right, Word Tech Editions, and Gala, Solitude Hill Press, and is working on a new book tentatively titled Church and Garden, Passion Flowers and Ravishing Butterflies. She has been an artist in residence in Morocco and Spain, and you can find her online at www.lynneshapiropoet.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Miss Lynne Shapiro. Hi, Lynne, good evening. How are you today? Oh, I think you're still muted, Lynne.
That's a good way to start.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Totally fine. How are you this evening? Welcome.
I'm pretty good. I probably could be a little bit better, but I'm fine. And I'm excited about this because this gives me a chance to think about my own relationship with my work, which I have not ever been interviewed before. So this is as exciting as when I met you when I had never read a poem with music before. So wow. You are someone who leads me to new things. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that. Thank you for being my guest. Now I'm going to start off with a basic question that I ask all my guests. And that is, who is Lynne Shapiro? How would you define yourself or describe yourself?
Wow, that is, I didn't anticipate such a difficult question. Who am I? At this point in my life, I have finally recognized myself as a poet, I suppose. And that feels very good. Let's see, I studied literature and I studied art and I taught for years. And I taught people about the creative process and about modernism. And I taught people how to look at things that they thought were really difficult to understand in the realm of painting and sculpture. And I helped people with difficult poetry. And then I always wanted to write, but it took me a while to be able to sit still because I had to see everything and do everything and go to every movie and every concert and do everything that I was interested in, go to everybody else's thing. And it's been a pleasure for me to now have the experience of being an artist and what that means in my life. So I suppose I've answered that question, although you could go in a myriad of directions from childhood to what you studied. But I suppose that that's the most meaningful thing, is that art has been very important in my life. But at this time, I get to play as an artist. I get to discover things and save things.
Awesome, awesome, excellent. Now, you know, we all, as poets, you know, we all have our own reasons as to why we started writing poetry. What would you say was your motivation or inspiration to wanting to write poetry?
Well, I love to read things out loud. I loved being a teacher, and I taught children's literature and I read out loud, and I was a mom, I read out loud. And I like the size of a poem. It's like, it can be this big. And so I suppose the reason that I started to write was to save things. Like a poem is a little pocket of thoughts. It's a little place where you can hold on to things. And lately, this seems really quirky to me, but I couldn't remember this word, to estivate. It was a word that I discovered about my butterflies when they were not hibernating, but in the summer deciding not to eat and to slow down. And I couldn't find the word again. I couldn't find it anywhere. And lately I'm like, oh, just put it in a poem and then you'll know where it is. And so I think that's part of my reason for writing, is it's just a way of, it's like an organizing principle. It's probably more organized than anything, is when it's in a poem, there's a kind of a sense and, or even a nonsense, but that it's like in a frame on a pedestal, it's kept somewhere safe. So
Right.
that might be why I write.
Excellent, excellent. Now, thinking back to when you first started writing poetry, do you recall what subject matter you tackled first starting out?
Well, I think when I was really young, I had two books that I carried with me everywhere: Life in the Ancient World and Lost Civilizations. And whenever we had to write, I would open up these volumes when I was in elementary school, and I would write about broken pottery, ruins, whatever. So that might have been my first subject matter. But then when I started to write for my 50th birthday, I wrote a poem about turning gray and my piano teacher's hair. And so I think I went into a more personal realm than I usually do, because I usually write about art or nature or ancestors. So those are my sort of themes that I think imbue most of my writing. Yeah, I hope I answered that.
Oh, excellent. Definitely, definitely. Now, as you carried yourself through, you know, your own writing journey, who or what would you say that you would give credit to helping you develop your own style as a poet?
Well, you know, the most meaningful studies in my life were Dada and Surrealism. And I would say that most people don't know very much about Dada and Surrealism. They might think it's all, like dripping clocks and strange things. But the Surrealist philosophy was really key over many, many years. My poems are not very surrealist, but one of the things that I think moved me along in an important way was that the surrealists, in particular, like you could say Andre Breton, the father of surrealism, Paris in the 20s, said, that it's not about the magic of the writer. It's not that the writer is brilliant. It's that the world is brilliant and the universe is magical, and that we just tell, we just take it in. The artist, poet Jean Arp said art just grew like his fingernails, and he just cut his nails and the art just fell from him. But there was a humility to that made it easy for me to feel like I could write, that I because again, it wasn't about me as much as being the person through whom the magic of the universe passes through upon occasion, if you're lucky. And we're all lucky if we pay attention to those kinds of things. So, and I never wrote really kind of sad things, even though I do deal with Holocausts and migrants and Palestinian and Israeli issues. I don't even try. I just always do things in a kind of a light, more uplifting kind of a way. And I think all of this goes back a little bit to the surrealists, who are also so political, since they were squeezed as they were between the two wars. But my work doesn't appear surrealist. So I hope that makes sense to someone who's trying to figure out, how could this be relevant to surrealism? But
Right.
it does.
Right. So would I be correct in saying that you taking on this surrealist perspective in your writing has given you a sense of freedom in terms of your creativity?
It has. And, the surrealists, if somebody said to the surrealists, I know you're a poet, but could you make a painting for this art exhibition? They'd go, sure, I can paint a painting without being a painter. I could make something. And conversely, painters, somebody would say, could you write a poem or do some writing? And they would say yes. So that freedom to go where you're not necessarily an expert, or the freedom to try something, or the desire to be a part of a community, which is also a big piece of being a poet, is a part of that surrealist background. It's like, gee, when I got up to read my poem with that music, I was just like, gotta try this. I can't imagine anything more exciting. I don't know what it would feel like until I do it. And there's a little of that in the writing process itself.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now I'd like to dive into your chapbooks for a few minutes. First off, I want to congratulate you on those projects. And what was the motivation for putting these chapbooks together? Like, can you share with our audience what that process was like for you?
Yeah, and there are two very, very different processes. And I suppose I have a really hard time organizing poems and papers. And one day, in a sort of act of clarity, I put a group of poems together and knew what went in and what didn't go in, and sent it off to WordTech Communications. And so this book is called To Set Right. And the whole poetry book, it's sort of a pun, the idea of correcting things, which I think is true for both of my chapbooks. Like, excuse me, but that's not how I want to end. I have more to say on that. Let me set you straight is a part of the setting right. But also because I loved visual things, I worked with this wonderful designer who's from Venezuela. And I took a class with her to learn InDesign, and I couldn't learn it. It was just like overwhelming. So I decided to just hire her one day as a consultant to ask her questions. And then in the end, I was like, you know what, just let her do the book. So the idea of To Set Right, all of the titles are set to the right. So it has a visual element to it. And this book is sort of a book about cruelty and transcending cruelty. The first poem is sort of a little bit about the Trumpian world, and some of it is a little bit about anti-Semitism, people who kill snakes. I have a poem called Reverence for Bees and Being, which is about Palestinians and Jews who are beekeepers together in a program called Bees for Peace. And that there's also art through here, because that's how I sort of tend to understand things. So that's this chapbook. It's very personal. It's, even though the design is a little unorthodox, I have, you know, the poem that I read when I met you was this hourglass poem, and it sits sideways in the book as though it's an hourglass still spinning.
Wow.
So I had so much fun. Instead of worrying about, oh, are these poems any good? I just had such a blast collaborating with the designer. And my second book, which was pretty much accepted on the same day, the people who published this, Solitude Hill Press, called me and said that they were interested in publishing my poem as their first. This is the first book they've ever published. So that was very exciting. But this book took, I don't know, I've been working on it. Well, the poem is set in the 1980s, and it's set at the Whitney Museum in 1983. And it took me all those years to finish the book. It's got so much of me and my childhood and my surrealist stuff in it. It has photographs, which I'm thrilled with. This is a photograph of, it's the wedding photograph of Gayla, who was Salvador Dali's wife. Before she met Salvador Dali, she was married to the poet Paul Eluard, and she was the lover of the artist Max Ernst. And this book is about an evening at the Whitney Museum when I was somehow mysteriously left alone with an artist. I don't know where everybody else went. It was a gala. That's the double name of gala. And David, Sally, and I had a conversation, and he didn't know me, and he assumed I was young, not particularly intelligent young woman, and he didn't want to talk to me about the fact that he had used a photograph of Gayla Dali in one of his paintings. And he said, oh, you don't understand my work. And I'm like, I do understand your work, but I'm also interested in this.
Right.
So it was something that I held inside for a very long time, and it ended up being sort of a feminist kind of a book on being overlooked and not really seen in your entirety. I hope that's clear.
Wow. Well, those are definitely two very unique projects, and I congratulate you for for stepping out, to getting these books done. That's a very awesome achievement, and I will be getting copies for myself very, very soon.
I will send you copies for interviewing me. I just dawned on me I should have done that before, but I will certainly give them to you. Yeah.
Yes, I will most certainly be looking forward to reading them. Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, the route that you took to get these books published is not necessarily the traditional publishing route. Is that correct?
Well, Word Tech Communications, partly what happened is they accepted the book and they sent me the software to put actually, to put, when you get a book published, I think the publisher sends you some software to download your book into.
Right.
And I did that, and nothing happened. And I thought, oh my God, I just cannot deal with this. Let me call on somebody else who can help me figure this out, because I was just stymied from the start. And the second book was just, I had been in a workshop. This person from Solitude Hill Press had picked a poem of mine years ago in an anthology that Ragged Sky Press out of Princeton did, called Eating Your Wedding Dress, Clothing Inspired Poems. And so we re-met at a workshop, and she read the manuscript for Gala when it was in process and really liked it, which felt really good, because I think I had about 20 rejections of this book. And it's really the book I really believed in and wasn't going to give up on, but it was rejected and rejected and rejected. To have somebody say, we're starting a press and we want your book to be the first, was lovely. So they're sort of maybe typical, but nobody's story is ever the same, I don't think. Everybody's got a different way that they came to publication, I think.
Right, right. So would you say that you would prefer this method that you chose, as opposed to, you know, the traditional publishing route, where you would need an agent and, you know, go through a whole lot of tape and so on and so forth, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't think agents are ever looking for poets. So I think poets are free from the agent system. What was really delightful was working with a designer, since I'm so visual, and I couldn't, you know, I had an hourglass poem. I couldn't figure out how to make it look like an hourglass. I did collage, and I didn't know how to do it, but working with a designer gave me so much more freedom and ability to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I mean, here's an example. This poem is the only poem where the title faces the other way. And it's a poem about a wedding and finding lost family. And in a Jewish wedding, there is a canopy that goes over the bride and groom. And I made my title like a canopy in my mind. And this is the groom's side, and this is the bride's side, because they're separated in the Orthodox wedding that I happen to be invited to from a family member. But, you know, this, like, you could make that, I couldn't have done this without I couldn't have figured it out. It just would have been, but instead would have been exactly like good enough. But this way, the book is really manages to utilize my love. I worked in a museum for 10 years. I worked in galleries. I taught art history. I can't do anything myself particularly. I mean, I could do things that make me happy, but so working with a designer, I would say, is freedom. And the next little book, I don't think I'm going to send it out. I think I'm going to sew it myself and have fun with my own little project that I'm hoping I'll work with the same designer whose name is Faride, and she's from Venezuela. And if anybody wanted any information, she's decided to, I don't think I should say it, but she's decided to open her own studio. I won't say anymore. She may kill me. But
wow,
yeah.
That's definitely awesome to have that opportunity to work with someone to bring your vision to life. So I'm very excited about, you know, you being able to get those books out to the public. I'm very excited and happy for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So of all the subject matter that you choose to write about, would you say there are certain subjects that you enjoy writing about more than others? Or do you feel that you just write whatever's on your heart?
Well, I think I'm a slightly weird poet. Like sometimes poets, they're like, oh my God, I have to write this line down. I'm going to forget the line. And I'm not like that. I I think I like to get lost in my poem, and I like to spend time in certain poems. I've finished reading Moby Dick with a reading group, and I went to the Whitney Museum and I saw this video about Moby Dick, and I just needed to spend more time in that video. And so I started writing my way onto the deck of a ship and seeing where I am. And so it's, even though I love music and sound, sometimes it's sort of an idea like, oh my God, this is, oh, this happened. This is stuff that I would want to sit down with and kind of almost like a sculptor pull out, or a watercolorist. But I'm not, yeah. So I ends up that a lot of everything I write ends up having birds in it, even if it's something completely different. I do end up with a lot of nature in places that you wouldn't expect there to be kind of nature. Like, why is nature here? But it's just shows up, and it sort of is, in a way, it's like opens a portal for me, like almost like the birds come and greet me, and suddenly the poetry door opens and I am in a poem. And actually, I really like being in that space of kind of inventing and seeing what arises, just like everybody. Yeah.
Right. Excellent, excellent. Now, I'm quite sure that you've heard the word representation, thrown around in some way, shape, or form, in different circles. Now, in regards to your writing, how important is it for you to make sure that you're representing yourself in your totality through your writing? Whether it's you're talking about your education, your womanhood, religion, if it applies to you, everything that's concerning every facet of your own life in general. How important is it for you to make sure that when it comes to your writing, that when people read your work, that you feel that you're being seen in your totality?
Well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. And sometimes I don't need to be seen in my totality, that it's really the world. Like, one day I had a visitation from a dove that was staring at me in a strange way. And I realized the dove, I think, was born in my tree and recognized me, but I hadn't recognized it. So it's more like, oh my God, this bird knew who I was before I knew who the bird was. Now that's not representing me at all, except as just a person in the world who doesn't always pay attention. I'm like, well, I've never seen anything stare at me this way. So sometimes representation really doesn't matter, because other things matter more at times. Sometimes I might seem a little snobby, like when I was young. Like Jean-Luc Godard, the filmmaker, died this week. And I used to say, I love Godard, knowing people would go, ew, gross, you're so full of yourself. But I loved Godard. I really did. It wasn't my snobby side. It was who I was. And sometimes when I share poems, people don't really know all the stuff I'm referring to. And to be true to myself, I don't want to dumb down my poems at all. So I use like words. I was thinking of sharing tonight a fun poem about bees. And then I realized, oh, it's got all this bee terminology that people won't know, but who cares? You get what you get. You can look it up. But I'm not going to take it out because that's who I am. And the other piece of this, which is perhaps a little more controversial sometimes, is as a Jewish person, I am not interested in my religion, but culturally, there are things that are there. And I realize that at the multicultural table, sometimes Jews are not invited because we are seen as white people who have run things. But I disagree. We have been through many of the same travails of people who are marginalized, or people who were migrants, or people who lost their homeland and lost their language and lost their stories. And so that is a part of representation. And sometimes I feel, obnoxious about it, because it's really not, it's not central to me. And at the same time, our family, our roots, our ancestral elements are always important to all peoples. And it is how I connect to all people. And I learned to feel more comfortable dealing with some of these issues from reading African American poetry. I have this beautiful book about African American nature poems. So it doesn't always, it isn't always about representation. It's just, so I've struggled with this issue of being, kind of not invited to the multicultural table. And I hope this doesn't offend anyone or get me in any trouble, but your question makes me answer in this way. So the two things: one is what appears like snobbery art knowledge, and other kinds of nerdy knowledge, because I'm addicted to that kind of stuff. And then the other is my ethnicity. I mean, I wish I could check a box that says Eastern European Jew instead of white.
Right.
So that's my story. Oh, thank you, Patricia. Okay, I've answered that. Stop talking, because I can go on nervously, repeat the same thing ad infinitum, as though I'm just setting it like a poem, but.
Right. No, but that's totally okay. I appreciate that answer. And, I totally understand your perspective. And I just want to share that it is important to have, how can I say this? It's like I want to say that your perspective is just as important as mine, and it's just as important as every other poet, regardless of race, religion, or what have you. And I want you to know that if there was ever a time that anyone made you feel not welcome at the table, know that you are welcome at the table, because you have experiences to offer that no one else has experienced. And you never know the impact you may be having with the experiences that you have, to share,
Right. And in life, oftentimes, I had a very difficult time when I went to graduate school. It was really snooty, and I was from California, and I went to school in Boston, and they really looked down on Californians. I was like, really? Seriously? And sometimes I used to think I don't belong here. I don't belong here. And then it was like, wait a minute, I have a better attitude about life and people and art than these people, and I'm not going to be removed. So you have to be able to stand up for who you are sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm in full agreement with that. And that provides the perfect segue to the next segment of this podcast, which is this. Now it's time, Lynne, for you to take the mic. So at this time, Lynne, you are welcome to share up to 5 poems of your choice to give our audience an idea of, your poetic stylings. So at this time, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. So let's see, 5 poems. I am going to start with an art poem. And it happened, I wrote this poem because I selected a postcard with a Joseph Albers painting on it to send to a poet somewhere, a part of Poetry Postcard Month through a poet in, I believe, Portland, that's been going on for years now. And so Joseph Albers did these squares, homage to the square, and each square, there's a square inside a square inside a square. And the color, let's say the inner square is red. That color red, when it's moved to an outer square and is surrounded by different colors, changes how it's seen. So the poem tried to recreate some of that. And this, I played with the idea of the homage to the square being a square in Krakow, Poland, which I visited. It was a beautiful, huge square. And when I was in Krakow, I ended up going to Helena Rubinstein's house. I didn't know she was from there. And I was a Helena Rubinstein Fellow of Art History. So that is in this poem, which no one would necessarily know. And when I started to write about Homage to the Square, a song by Brian Eno that happened to be called Miss Shapiro, which is my name, a list poem that I misremembered. It's supposed to be all the peasants in the square. And then there's a list poem that follows, but I got it wrong and I got all the ladies in the square. And so the poem is in a square, which I think is just so cool. And because Albers had oftentimes 4 squares, there are 4 parts to the square, and there are 4 lines on each section to pay homage to him. It's a lot of information. I won't do this every time. And I like to sing the first line, even though it doesn't really sound like Brian Eno's song. I still think in my head, I hear it. All the ladies in the square in flouncy orange dresses, tans dance the orange, dressed in orange, spin near cloth halls, sunlit brick walls, and whisper with Helena Rubinstein nude glowy lips to one another and their blue suited men. The colors, blue suits, luscious lips, and tangerine dresses change as often as dancers swap partners. The orange dresses become ever hotter hues beside the cool down, reddening walls of a summer's night's measured descent. The show was quite relentless, color adjacent to color, arm in arm like partners, move to the music as each shade slips in and out of classification on the color wheel of the ceaselessly changing square. Okay. And then I don't usually read this poem, but I'm going to. I have to write down that it's poem number 2. I can't keep track of things. It's called More Than 4 Questions, and it is a poem about a satyr. Moss grows on matseva, that's the word for cemetery stones. Moss grows on matseva like pincushions in tailor shops. Twilight, fireflies wink in the ghetto field as they set out to meet unlikely friends. Second growth ghosts within and without the cemetery gates. I take leave of the Seder table where the Haggadah is read to walk amongst my real family. In the dark, distances shrink. Unclear words flung like books land before me on cobblestones amid rustling skirts and heels. Who will meet me at the threshold? How will I make myself known? Inscriptions in Hebrew that I cannot read. Son of Shvi and Nacha, daughter of Jacob and Malka, partitioned by gender, engraved birth and death years, some embroidered with palms and stars, burning candles or rows of books. I raise my glass, dip my finger in wine, remove drip by bloody drip, the ancient plagues onto my dinner plate. Do pastoral aprons bind us still to unfinished chores and inward-facing courtyards? Each sip of wine, Baruch atah, thimblefuls of memory. How to reconnect to this land of milk and murder. Measure the lichen, indicator of good health, blessings. Measure the wind in the field like a needle coursing through silk. I run my fingers over the tablecloth hem. Why is this night different from all other nights? A final scene with no verbs. I find myself in the cold, sowing seeds, placing stones like buttons, whispering in that haunted language so I can reconcile parents with children and children with parents, be my grandfather's emissary. My brother-in-law reads the Hebrew. Someone asks in English, who will open the door for Elijah? No one notices that I've already let in the ghosts. And now I guess I have, was that the second poem? Yeah, so I have a couple more poems. Let's try this poem. It's a little one. Early morning boat to Ossabaw. And Ossabaw Island is one of the sea islands off the coast of Georgia. And it happened to be where Gullah people lived. I did an NE National Endowment for Humanities workshop studying the people who lived in this area who speak Gullah, who are Gullah Geechee people. And I had a mystical experience while taking the boat there. Early morning boat to Ossabaw. Only horizon for bearings. Slight breeze, pale pink. Water mimics sky. No ripples, calm. And then the ocean as I'd seen it as a child. Arms outstretched, my grandma and I drifted near the offing, edge where world drops off and away. And I felt no fear then. And then I'm getting ready to go to California with my mother's ashes. And I have a little tiny poem that I really do think is about death. And I read it to her when she was dying, and I'm thinking it would put her to sleep and calm her down just to hear my voice. And I looked at her and her eyes were just like, popped open, and she really, I think, was relating to this poem. And it's a reference to Rilke, when are we so open to possibilities? Caterpillars, tiny astronauts, harness themselves to fate, wriggle free from earthly suits to enter an orbital sleep wherein days and months pass and bodies melt away. When the cocoon darkens, capsule doors will soon pop open, and out will come a crumpled, spindly-legged creature, newly awakened to flight, and left behind, within the still tethered empty pupa, a tiny drop of the Milky Way. And I think this is my last poem, and I will read from Gala, a very complicated book. And I think I will read a poem from, it's one long poem. So here, it's not the first poem, but it's called Back Up, an hour before the donors tour. The elevator doors opened onto an almost finished floor, abuzz with art handlers in white gloves, electricians with ladders and bulbs, and sweepers with brooms gliding across the stone floor. And there, hanging in the first room, a shock of recognition. Those eyes, whose eyes? I know those eyes, I'd know them anywhere. But how? How is it possible? How could I be right? They're Gala's eyes. Really? How? I wouldn't recognize my own eyes in a painting, or my husband's eyes, or my mother's eyes. Though I did once meet a coyote waiting for me at the crossroads of two deserts, and I recognized my grandmother's eyes. Those eyes, Gala's, when she was Gala Eluard, and it's not the greatest picture, before Max Ernst, before Salvador Dali. Double down that customary self-doubt. I want to run home, find in a book the precise photograph with these eyes, see if I'm mistaken. How do we distinguish one another? We all look alike. They all look alike. I can't tell them apart. Okay, once to say, think too of Chuck Close and his prosopagnosia, face blindness. And is that 5 poems? I think it is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I'm almost speechless. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the beautiful poetic stylings of Miss Lynne Shapiro. Lynn, thank you so much. I could literally close my eyes and see your words play out as if it was a short film. I mean, the emotion and the imagery and just your overall passion for your words is just very impressive and outstanding. Thank you so much for taking time out to share your work. It's beautiful, beautiful poetry. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. You are so welcome.
And I'm sure the audience can agree. Excellent work, excellent work. And at this time, for the remainder of the podcast, I'm just going to share my screen again. And it is at this time, ladies and gentlemen, is the audience Q&A portion of the podcast. So at this time, if there's anyone in the audience right now that has a question or a comment for Lynn, feel free to unmute yourself now and share your question or comment.
It's not a huge audience, but hello, ask me anything.
Come on, don't be shy, everyone. Don't be shy.
What are your plans for your poetry later on?
What are my plans for my poetry when I'm dead? What do you mean?
No, you got one place to go. Now, what do you plan? How do you, what's the next step for you? How do you pursue your?
Well, I have a lot of unfinished projects, which would do me well. I have a children's book that I've truly believe in. It's called Henry's Onion, and I would like to make that and make it a little more poetic. I have an essay that I wrote about Scotland and bird watching, and somehow I wanted to go back there. So I opened everything up and started to write poems. And I would like to do like a little tiny chapbook that takes that essay and the poems and sort of combines them. And that book revolves around a photograph that I took of a man holding a winter wren. And when I came home and printed it, the man looked just like St. Francis, and the island that I had been living on had been a Franciscan leper colony. So I felt, so that's got to be finished. And then I have a book of when I was totally passionate about passion flowers that have little tiny, small little writings about passion flowers with an essay. And I have a diary I found from this woman, actually. Her name was Sarah Bulmer, from the 1850s from Chester, New York. And I went to Chester, New York, and I walked in the cemetery and I found her grave, and I knew everybody that she was writing about and figured out how old she was and her connection to everyone. So I wrote an essay, but then I'm deconstructing it into a kind of a call and response with her and her diary entry. And really, I owe becoming a writer to her, because I was very unhappy at a job, and I worked at a school with somebody I did not like, who was the director. And I would walk to school, and I was someone who would just obsess on everything. And I trained myself to stop obsessing and to instead work on poems. And the reason this happened is Sarah Bulmer, who never married, she had no prospects as an older woman who she took in sewing. And she wrote working for myself. And I thought, well, you know what? You need to do some work for yourself. And so that would be like, some of those projects, getting them finished would be extremely exciting for me to just sort of wash my hands clean. After I finished these books, I thought I wanted to do new, and I have written some new work. But the pull, the desire to finish things is really, really strong. And part of that is, I mean, some people here know, I've had ovarian cancer, and I've wanted to break free from and do new things and feel like a whole new life ahead of me. And then while I was doing some banking and all I wanted to do was finish it, I'm like, wanting to finish things is also really good. You can do both. So that's what I'm kind of trying to do, is finish and at the same time put my foot on the accelerator and go forward.
Beautiful. I have another question. I'm getting like Emily Dickinson vibes about the Sarah person. In her diary, does it mention her anything about writing poetry or trying to get something published?
No, but I do have a line in that book about, she went to church. The diary is pretty bleak. She went to church twice in one day, and it was snowy and miserable. And I'm like, you go to church twice and God doesn't follow you home. And so then I mention Emily Dickinson. I bring it into the book.
That was the vibes I was getting.
How she, for her, she didn't go to church. Her garden was the holy place. And so, I mean, it's not an easy project for me, because when at first you asked about representation, I thought you were asking me about realism, like being like in the art world, representative, is realistic art that's representational.
Right.
So I have a very hard time lying in poetry. And even though poetry is neither fiction nor nonfiction, it's not easy for me sometimes to use my imagination to enter this woman's life, but that's kind of very compelling for me. And it's hard work. It's not something that comes easily. It's a lot easier to describe a caterpillar than it is to imagine what Sarah Bulmer was thinking while the clock was ticking and she's all alone sewing. But I'm working on it. Thank you, Patricia, for those questions.
Oh, awesome. Yes, thank you, Patricia, for being on and for those questions. And also, by the way, congratulations again on your recent anthology contribution, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah. Yes. Thank you. There's so many things. Yeah, it's so much on the burner, and I have so many. It show's about you, not about me.
No.
No.
Close to the end.
I know I have to like ask for the submissions coming in December, October. Oh God, it's like one step at a time. There's so much going on with jobs and
Right.
life in general.
Right, but I'm so happy
yeah.
for you to make that achievement. That's excellent. Congratulations on all the best to you.
Thank you.
And I know Patricia like from a distance, but recently we went to a reading at the Hoboken Public Library, and I loaned Roxanne Hoffman my glasses, and I forgot that she had my glasses. And so she called me and said, can I come over and give you your glasses? And she was with Patricia.
Yes.
And Patricia and Roxanne came into my house, and we sat down, and they really liked, I had my caterpillars were there and garden. And I had by the way, I had a hummingbird in my garden yesterday when I was talking to Roxanne. I'm like, "Oh, there's a hummingbird," which it's migration. So it took one look at me and fled. But I had a hummingbird in Hoboken. So that was kind of exciting. Anyway.
Awesome,
Awesome.
awesome,
Yeah.
awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you, Patricia, for those questions. Is there anyone else on the line that would like to share a question or comment before we close out?
I want to ask my two sister-in-laws are on the line. My brother-in-law, hello, thank you. Or what? Quiet. Crickets,
No?
which are prevalent at this time of year.
Well, I have a very good question before we close out. If you could collaborate with any poet, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
Wow. Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to feel out of my league. So I'm going with the father of surrealism, Andre Breton, who wrote good poems, but not all of them good poems, and was really more of a philosopher and a thinker, but I think he would be open to being playful. And that would be a really fun collaboration. And I adore him. And so I would say that, and I would have loved to have met him.
Awesome, awesome. And what would you hope to accomplish with your work? You know, when all is said and done, what would you like to have achieved with your work?
Well, you know, because I started writing late and because I didn't get an MFA and I don't write any one kind of poetry. I'm like all over the place because I believe that surrealist theory that whatever you write is a reflection of what you're writing. It's not like I'm going to write a novel. You work on what you're working and then you see what it is.
Right.
So anyway, what was the question? To ask me that question one more time.
Sure. Like what would you hope to accomplish with your work?
So what I really hope to accomplish is connecting with people and other poets, which I kind of, you know, I don't have a group of people that I got an MFA with, or, you know, I live in Hoboken, and while there is some there are poets here, through poetry, it's really fun to connect with a wider world. And I'm actually in a crazy writing group that I was desperate to start with people who live in Colorado and Oregon and Washington. And it sort of, I think, is delightful to have poetry friends. And I don't know if my poems are going to change the world. So, I mean, that would be nice, but I think we've got too much going on and too many issues to think poets are going to really be the legislators of the future when we have really bad legislators sending people to Martha's Vineyard and spending $12 million that could have been housing and food for all those people. So my poems are, you know, can't fix that, but can connect me to people who have the same heart and care about the same things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I believe you've achieved that this evening with your work. And I'm quite sure those that were on tonight and those that will view this video at some point will feel the same way. So thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Now, as we close out this evening, I want to take time out to first and foremost say thank you. Thank you, Lynne, for your time and your talents. Awesome poetry, very exquisite imagery, very emotional writing that's heartfelt and meaningful. And I just want to encourage you to keep exercising your gifts, because as I always say, you may not reach everybody, but you will reach somebody. Your writing has purpose and your writing matters. So thank you so much for sharing your heart through your words. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. For those of you that wish to connect with Poets with Purpose and the P.W.P sessions, you can do so through the Facebook group, Poets with Purpose, You can also find me on Twitter at @PoetsWPurpose, the YouTube channel of the same name, as well as on Clubhouse at The Anointed Pen. Stay tuned for the next episode. Episode 5 will be featuring Robin Graham, who is the founder and publisher of Spotlight on Recovery magazine, which will take place on this Saturday, September 17th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For more information about my podcast or the workshop, you can call me at 646-372-6230 or email me at poetsforpurpose@gmail.com. All of my logos and flyers are designed by the awesome team at Eclipse Graphics. You can find them on Instagram at Eclipse Graphics NY. You can look them up to see samples of their work and connect with them for any of your projects. And lastly, for those of you that wish to make a donation, you can do so through PayPal, Tap Media Man, $ The Anointed Pen on Cash App, and through Zelly utilizing my phone number. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a wrap of episode 4. Lynn, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you to my audience for your time and participation. This episode will be uploaded to the Poets with Purpose YouTube channel within the hour or so. And once it's uploaded, you can feel free to share it with your networks. Lynn, I'll be sure to send this to you via email, the link as well as the video itself. Thank you all so much for your time and participation. Have a good night and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.